What you're about to hear isn't a story about weight loss. It's about what happens when someone decides your transformation belongs to them, and you do not deserve happiness outside them. How does the person who destroyed you react when you become everything they said you'd never be?
This is CrimeAtlas. Thank you for joining us today. Hit the like button if you enjoy this video, subscribe, and turn on your post notifications.
The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of the small beige house on Cypress Avenue, casting delicate patterns across Angela Brooks' bedroom wall. She lay still for a moment, listening to the familiar sounds of her neighborhood waking up. Mrs. Chin's wind chimes singing their metallic melody next door, the distant hum of traffic on Jefferson Highway, the rhythmic thud of someone's morning jog passing by her window. This was peace. This was safety. Angela stretched her arms above her head, marveling, as she did every single morning, at how her body responded. No shooting pain in her knees, no struggle to catch her breath, no dread at the thought of standing up. 5 years ago, getting out of bed had been a 40-minute ordeal involving careful positioning, mental preparation, and sometimes tears. Now, she simply swung her legs over the side of the mattress and stood. The woman in the mirror still surprised her sometimes. She ran her fingers through shoulder-length brown hair that she'd finally learned to style, touched the defined line of her jaw, traced the collarbones that had emerged like archaeological discoveries over the years. Angela knew she wasn't magazine beautiful. Her body bore the marks of her journey in loose skin and faint stretch marks, but she had something better than beauty. She had herself back. In the kitchen, sunlight pooled on the small breakfast table where a single coffee mug waited, the one Daniel had given her last Christmas, with "World's Strongest Woman" printed in gold letters. The memory made her smile. Daniel had presented it with such earnestness, his brown eyes crinkling at the corners, his voice soft. "Because you are, you know, the strongest person I've ever met." Angela measured out coffee grounds with practiced precision, her mind drifting to the day ahead. Thursday. That meant her support group meeting at the community center at 6. She'd been leading the Thursday night sessions for 2 years now, ever since Dr. Patterson had suggested she might find healing in helping others walk the path she'd traveled. He'd been right. There was something profoundly grounding about sitting in a circle of folding chairs, looking into the faces of people who understood, really understood, what it meant to feel trapped inside your own body. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the kitchen with its rich, earthy aroma. Angela pulled eggs from the refrigerator, cracked 3 into a bowl, whisked them with a splash of milk. Cooking had become a meditation for her, a way to reclaim something that had once been her enemy. She'd learned to prepare meals that nourished rather than numbed, to taste food instead of merely consuming it. As the eggs sizzled in the pan, her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Daniel. "Morning, beautiful. Still on for dinner Saturday? I'm thinking about that little Italian place you loved." Angela's fingers flew across the screen. "Absolutely. Can't wait to see you." She added a heart emoji, something that would have mortified the old Angela, the woman who'd been convinced she didn't deserve such simple, uncomplicated affection. Daniel had spent months proving otherwise. He was patient in ways Marcus had never been, interested in ways Marcus never was. When she talked, Daniel listened with his whole body leaning in, his phone turned face down, his attention entirely hers. The engagement ring caught the morning light as she set her phone down, a simple platinum band with a modest diamond that Daniel had chosen with her sister's help. They'd been engaged for 3 months now, planning a small ceremony for the spring. Nothing fancy, just family, close friends, and the people who'd supported Angela through her transformation. She didn't need elaborate. She needed real. Angela plated her eggs, added a slice of whole wheat toast, and carried her breakfast to the small dining table. Through the window, she could see Mr. Rodriguez across the street watering his lawn, the spray creating tiny rainbows in the humid Baton Rouge air. He waved when he spotted her. She waved back. This was another thing she'd reclaimed: visibility without shame. The ability to exist in the world without apologizing for the space she occupied. Her mind wandered, as it sometimes did during these quiet mornings, to the years she'd lost. The apartment she'd shared with Marcus had been dark, always dark, the curtains drawn against the outside world. She remembered the particular quality of that darkness, how it felt less like shadow and more like water, pressing in from all sides, drowning her slowly. Marcus had preferred it that way. Privacy, he called it, keeping what's ours between us. But Angela had understood, even then, that he was really saying, keeping you hidden, keeping you mine. She shook her head, physically trying to dislodge the memory. That was then. This was now. Marcus was her past. A closed chapter in a book she'd finally finished reading. The divorce had been finalized 4 years ago. She hadn't heard from him since the day he'd signed the papers, his jaw tight with barely contained rage, his eyes refusing to meet hers. Her lawyer had told her it was unusually smooth for such a contentious marriage. Sometimes, the lawyer had said, the difficult ones just want it over with too. Angela had taken that as a gift. A clean break. An ending that allowed for a beginning. After breakfast, she washed her single plate and mug, dried them, put them away. Everything in its place. Everything manageable. Her home was small, just 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a living room barely large enough for a couch and television. But it was hers. She paid the rent with money she earned. She chose the paint colors. She decided when to sleep, what to eat, whether to leave the curtains open or closed. Freedom, she'd learned, was made of 1,000 tiny choices. By 9 o'clock, Angela was dressed for work in comfortable slacks and a soft purple blouse that Daniel said brought out her eyes. She worked at the Hope Center 3 days a week, providing peer counseling for people considering or recovering from bariatric surgery. The pay wasn't much, but the work fed something deeper than her bank account. Every time she sat across from someone drowning in shame and hopelessness, she got to say the words she'd once needed to hear. You are not broken. You're not alone. And yes, it is possible to have a different life. She grabbed her keys from the hook by the door, her purse from the chair, and paused at the threshold. The morning stretched before her, full of possibility. The sky was clear. The air smelled of cut grass and summer heat. Her body felt strong, capable, ready. Angela Brooks believed, truly believed, that the hardest part of her life was over. The suffering, the shame, the years of feeling invisible and worthless were behind her now, filed away in memory, where they could hurt her but not destroy her. She didn't know that 200 miles away, in a studio apartment in Houston cluttered with empty beer bottles and old photographs, Marcus Brooks was staring at his phone screen, his hands shaking with rage. She didn't know that the life she'd so carefully rebuilt was about to be tested in ways she couldn't imagine. She didn't know that someone else was just beginning to unravel. Angela locked her front door, walked down the 3 porch steps, and headed toward her car, the morning sun warm on her shoulders. The wind chimes sang their gentle song. The neighborhood was quiet and safe. For now. Angela hadn't always been afraid of Marcus Brooks. That was the cruelest part, the knowing that once she'd actually felt safe with him. They'd met at a community barbecue in the summer of 2008, back when Angela was 23 and still believed the world was fundamentally kind. She'd been helping her aunt set up folding tables when Marcus appeared beside her, lifting the heavy table she'd been struggling with as if it weighed nothing. "Let me get that for you," he'd said, flashing a smile that made her stomach flip. He was handsome in an unpolished way. Broad shoulders, dark hair that fell across his forehead, eyes that seemed to see directly into her. "I'm Marcus. I just moved into the apartments on Oak Street." Angela, she'd managed, suddenly self-conscious about the sweat on her brow, the way her shirt clung to her frame. She'd always been curvy, even then, not large, but substantial in a way that made her feel both visible and invisible at the same time. "Pretty name," Marcus had said, holding her gaze a moment longer than necessary. "Suits you." For the next 3 months, Marcus was everywhere. He'd show up at the coffee shop where Angela worked, ordering complicated drinks just to talk to her. He'd text her good morning before her alarm went off and good night after she'd already climbed into bed. He remembered details, how she took her coffee, the name of her childhood dog, the fact that she'd always wanted to visit Maine but had never left Louisiana. "You pay attention," she told him once, impressed. "To you," Marcus had replied, taking her hand across the table at the diner where they'd gone for their 5th date. Always. Angela's friends had been charmed. Her mother had been cautiously optimistic. "He seems very focused on you," her mother had said, which Angela took as approval. She didn't recognize it as a warning. The proposal came fast, only 8 months after that first barbecue. Marcus had taken her to the botanical gardens, dropped to one knee beside the koi pond, and presented a simple gold band. "I know it's quick," he'd said, his voice tight with emotion, "but I've never been more sure of anything. You're mine, Angela, and I want to be yours forever. You're mine." She'd heard it as romance, as possession in the beautiful sense, the kind poets wrote about, the kind movies celebrated. She'd said yes without hesitation, ignoring the small voice in the back of her mind that whispered, "Why does he need to own you to love you?" The wedding was small, rushed, intimate. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of Baton Rouge, the kind of place with thin walls and cheaper rent. Marcus worked construction. Angela kept her job at the coffee shop and picked up weekend shifts at a local bookstore. Money was tight, but they were young and in love, and Angela believed that was enough. The first time Marcus raised his voice at her, she'd burn dinner. It wasn't even a full meal, just chicken that had stayed in the oven too long while she'd been on the phone with her sister. Angela had apologized immediately, already opening a window to clear the smoke, but Marcus had slammed his hand on the counter so hard the dishes rattled. "I work 12 hours in the sun, and I can't even come home to a decent meal." Angela had frozen, startled by the anger in his voice. But then his face had crumpled. He'd pulled her into his arms, apologizing profusely. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. Work was hell today, and I took it out on you. That's not fair. You're the best thing in my life." She'd forgiven him. Of course she had. Everyone had bad days. The second time, she wanted to visit her mother for the weekend. "Why do you need to go there?" Marcus had asked, his tone casual, but his jaw tight. "Your mom can come here if she wants to see you." "I haven't been home in 3 months," Angela had explained. "I miss her. It's just 2 days. 2 days where I'm here alone," Marcus had said, and suddenly his voice had an edge she'd only heard once before. "2 days where you're choosing her over me. Over us. It's not choosing. It feels like choosing, Angela. It feels like I'm not enough for you." She'd stayed home. She'd told her mother she was coming down with something, and she felt guilty, both for lying to her mother and for disappointing Marcus. Somehow, she'd become the one apologizing, the one trying to smooth things over, the one responsible for managing his feelings. The pattern established itself so gradually that Angela didn't notice she was being trained. Don't see friends without permission. Don't mention male co-workers. Don't wear that dress. It's too revealing. Don't make plans without checking first. Don't. And with every don't, Angela's world contracted a little more. Food became her companion in the loneliness. After particularly difficult days, the ones where Marcus would give her the silent treatment for hours, leaving her desperate to understand what she'd done wrong, she'd find herself in the kitchen at midnight, eating ice cream straight from the container, chips by the handful, leftover pizza cold from the fridge. The food didn't judge her. It didn't need her to be perfect. It was reliable comfort in an increasingly uncomfortable life. The weight came on slowly at first, 10 pounds, then 20, then 30. Marcus noticed, but said nothing, which was somehow worse than criticism. His silence felt like confirmation of what Angela was already beginning to believe about herself, that she was becoming unworthy of his attention, undeserving of his love. By their 3rd anniversary, Angela had gained 60 pounds. By their 5th, she topped 250. Her clothes stopped fitting. She stopped going out. The coffee shop had let her go after she'd called in sick too many times, and the bookstore followed 6 months later. Marcus seemed relieved. "You don't need to work," he'd said, stroking her hair with a gentleness that felt more patronizing than comforting. "I'll take care of you. That's what husbands do." But taking care of her meant controlling the money. It meant Angela having to ask for grocery funds, for gas money, for anything beyond the bare necessities. It meant being dependent in every possible way. The apartment's curtains stayed closed. Marcus said it was for privacy, but Angela understood it was shame, his shame at what she'd become, her shame at having become it. She stopped answering calls from her sister. She stopped responding to her mother's texts. Not because Marcus explicitly forbade it, but because he'd sigh deeply when she did, or become distant, or make small comments about how much time you spend on that phone instead of with me. It was easier to just stop. By their 8th year of marriage, Angela weighed over 400 pounds. Simple tasks, showering, dressing, walking to the mailbox, required planning and effort. She'd given up trying to leave the apartment. Where would she even go? What would people think when they saw her? Marcus's voice had become her internal monologue. You did this to yourself. No one else will put up with this. You're lucky I stay. And Angela believed him. She believed she was lucky. She believed she deserved the contempt she saw flashing in his eyes when he looked at her. She believed the prison she was living in was one she'd built herself. She didn't understand, yet that Marcus had handed her the bricks. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Angela had been watching a documentary about women who'd escaped abusive relationships. She'd recorded it secretly, watching it in 20-minute increments when Marcus was at work, because she'd known, somehow known, that he wouldn't want her seeing it. One woman on the screen had said something that struck Angela like lightning. I thought I was staying because I loved him. I didn't realize I was staying because he'd convinced me I couldn't survive without him. There's a difference between love and captivity. Angela had sat on the couch, tears streaming down her face, the truth settling into her bones like lead. She was a captive. When Marcus came home that evening and made a comment about how she'd let herself go, Angela heard her own voice, rusty from disuse, say something she'd never said before. Stop. Marcus blinked. What? Stop talking to me like that. Her heart hammered against her ribs. I'm not your punching bag. His face darkened. Punching bag? I've never laid a hand on you. There are other ways to hurt someone, Angela whispered. The argument that followed was the worst of their marriage. Marcus screamed about ingratitude, about sacrifice, about how he'd wasted the best years of his life on her. Angela, fueled by something she'd thought was long dead, screamed back. She told him she was done. She told him she wanted a divorce. That's when Marcus grabbed her arm, not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to terrify. His face was inches from hers, his breath hot with rage. You don't get to leave me, he hissed. You're nothing without me. You understand? Nothing. Angela wrenched her arm free and did something she'd never done in 8 years of marriage. She called 911. The police arrived within minutes. They separated Angela and Marcus, took statements, assessed the situation. No visible injuries. No immediate threat. But the officer who spoke with Angela, a woman named Rodriguez with kind eyes, had pressed a card into her palm. Domestic violence doesn't always leave bruises, Officer Rodriguez had said quietly. If you need help getting out, call this number. There are people who will help you. That night, after the police left, after Marcus went to bed without speaking, Angela sat on the bathroom floor with Officer Rodriguez's card in her shaking hands. By the time Angela realized what was happening to her, leaving no longer felt possible. But impossible and undone are not the same thing. The apartment on Oak Street had exactly 847 square feet. Angela knew because she'd measured it once, pacing the perimeter during one of Marcus's long silences, counting steps, calculating distances, trying to quantify how small her world had become. 847 square feet, smaller than most people's backyards. This was the universe she inhabited. By the 10th year of their marriage, Angela rarely left the bedroom. The journey from bed to bathroom, maybe 15 feet, required rest breaks. Her knees screamed with every step. Her back ached constantly. Breathing was work, actual physical labor that left her exhausted by noon. She topped 500 pounds sometime around year 9, though she'd stopped weighing herself long before that. The numbers had stopped matching when they'd stopped being numbers and become evidence of her failure as a human being. Marcus no longer slept in their bed. He'd moved to the couch 3 years earlier, citing her snoring, which was really sleep apnea, though they'd never gone to a doctor to diagnose it. Angela would wake in the night, gasping, her heart racing, certain she was dying. She'd lie there in the dark, listening to Marcus's even breathing from the other room, and wonder if he'd even notice if she stopped breathing altogether. The isolation was complete now. Angela's mother had died 2 years earlier, a stroke, sudden and merciful. Angela had missed the funeral. Marcus had gone alone, telling family that Angela was too ill to travel, which was true in the way that all good lies contain a kernel of truth. Her sister, Rebecca, still called occasionally, but the conversations were strained, full of long silences and unasked questions. Rebecca knew something was wrong. She just didn't know how to reach through the walls Angela had built, or that Marcus had built. It was getting harder to tell the difference. Food was no longer comfort. It was punishment disguised as solace. Angela would order delivery, pizza, Chinese, burgers, using the small allowance Marcus gave her for necessities. She'd eat until she was sick, then hate herself for eating, then eat more to cope with the self-hatred. The cycle was perpetual, mechanical, numbing. Marcus watched with thinly veiled disgust. "You're killing yourself," he'd say, standing in the bedroom doorway while she ate, his arms crossed, his face impassive. "You know that, right? You're committing suicide with a fork." Angela would say nothing. What was there to say? He was right. She was killing herself. Slowly, deliberately, one bite at a time. What Marcus didn't understand, what Angela barely understood herself, was that sometimes killing yourself is the only way you can imagine escaping. The day Angela found the life insurance policy, everything changed. She'd been looking for the heating bill. Marcus had been complaining about the cost, insisting she keep the apartment colder despite how her body struggled to regulate temperature. She'd found the document in his desk drawer, filed neatly between utility statements and credit card bills. Liberty Life Insurance. Policyholder, Marcus Brooks. Insured, Angela Marie Brooks. Benefit, $500,000. Angela stared at the paper, her brain struggling to process what she was seeing. Marcus had taken out a life insurance policy on her. A substantial one. When? She checked the date. 5 years ago. Right around the time she'd hit 400 pounds. Her hands trembled as she calculated. The premiums weren't cheap, probably a few $100s a month. Money Marcus had claimed they didn't have. Money he'd said they couldn't spare for doctor visits or therapy or anything that might actually help Angela. But he'd had money for this. The realization moved through her like ice water. Marcus was waiting for her to die. Not actively killing her. That would be murder. But passively, patiently waiting. Enabling. Watching her eat herself to death while he collected his investment. The closed curtains, the isolation, the contempt disguised as concern. It all made a sick, terrible kind of sense. He didn't need to be the villain. He just needed to be patient. Angela carefully returned the policy to its place, her mind racing. She'd spent years believing she was the architect of her own misery. But what if she'd been wrong? What if Marcus hadn't just allowed her to collapse? What if he'd needed her to? The thought was too enormous to hold. It kept slipping away, too monstrous to fully believe. Surely not. Surely even Marcus wouldn't. But the policy had been filed so carefully, maintained so diligently. 5 years of payments he'd never mentioned. That night, Angela lay in bed, unable to sleep, staring at the water-stained ceiling, feeling the weight of her body pressing her into the mattress like a grave. She thought about her mother, dead at 63. She thought about Rebecca, who'd stopped calling as often. She thought about the life she'd once imagined for herself, vague and formless, but full of possibility, and how thoroughly that life had been dismantled. And she thought about the documentary she'd watched on that Tuesday years ago, before the fight, before the police. The woman who'd said, "There's a difference between love and captivity." Angela had been captive, but captivity only works if the prisoner stops believing indoors. At 2 a.m, she reached for her phone, an old, barely functioning thing Marcus had grudgingly allowed her to keep for emergencies, and typed with shaking fingers. Domestic Violence Hotline Louisiana. The first website that appeared had a chat function. Anonymous. Immediate. Safe. Angela clicked it. "Hello," she typed. "I think my husband is waiting for me to die." The response came within seconds. "You're safe here. Tell me what's happening." And for the first time in years, perhaps for the first time ever, Angela told the truth. All of it. The isolation, the control, the life insurance policy, the way her body had become both her prison and Marcus's long-term investment. She typed until her fingers ached, purging the poison she'd been carrying. The advocate on the other end listened. Actually listened. Then wrote, "What you're describing is financial abuse, emotional abuse, and coercive control. You are in danger. Would you be willing to make a plan to leave?" Leave. The word felt impossible. Laughable. How could someone who couldn't walk to the mailbox leave a marriage? "I weigh over 600 pounds, Angela typed. "I can barely move. Where would I even go?" "We have resources," came the reply. "Medical transport. Safe houses equipped for people with mobility challenges. You are not the first person in your situation, and you won't be the last. The question isn't whether you can leave. It's whether you want to." Angela stared at those words for a long time. Whether you want to. Did she want to? The question felt almost offensive. Of course she wanted to. She'd wanted to for years. But wanting and doing were separated by an ocean of impossibility. Except the advocate was saying it wasn't impossible. Difficult, yes. Complicated, certainly. But not impossible. Yes, Angela finally typed. I want to leave. Then let's make a plan. Over the next 3 weeks, Angela prepared in secret. The advocate connected her with a social worker who specialized in high-risk domestic situations. Together, they coordinated transportation, temporary housing, medical care. Rebecca was contacted, carefully, through a third party, and agreed immediately to help, her voice breaking over the phone when she finally understood the depths of what her sister had been enduring. I knew something was wrong, Rebecca kept saying. I knew, but I didn't know how to help. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Just be there when I leave, Angela had whispered. That's all I need. The day was set for a Thursday, Marcus's longest workday, when he left at 6 in the morning and didn't return until after 7. The medical transport van would arrive at 8. Angela would have 11 hours to disappear. The night before, Angela barely slept. Terror and hope warred in her chest, making breathing even harder than usual. What if Marcus came home early? What if the van didn't come? What if she got out only to discover she was too broken to ever be whole? But beneath the fear was something else. Something she thought was dead, but had only been dormant. A tiny, stubborn spark of will. The part of her that had called the police years ago. The part that had clicked on that chat function at 2 in the morning. The part that refused to become a policy payout. When Marcus's truck pulled out of the driveway at 5:47 a.m., Angela lay still, listening to the engine fade into distance. At 8:03 a.m., the doorbell rang. Angela heaved herself to a sitting position, her heart hammering. This was it. The door she'd stopped believing in. She was walking through it. Marcus believed Angela would never leave him. That belief, that certainty that she was too broken, too dependent, too defeated, had made him careless. That belief would one day cost them both everything. The medical transport team moved with efficient gentleness. 2 EMTs named James and Patricia who'd clearly done this before. They didn't express shock at Angela's size, didn't exchange glances, didn't make her feel like a spectacle. James simply introduced himself and Patricia, explained the process, and asked, "Are you ready, Miss Brooks?" Angela nodded, unable to speak past the knot in her throat. The specialized gurney they brought could accommodate up to 800 pounds. Patricia explained each step before it happened, how they'd help her move from bed to gurney, how the straps worked, what would happen at the other end. Angela appreciated the narration. It gave her something to focus on besides the voice in her head screaming that she was making a terrible mistake. The journey from bedroom to front door took 20 minutes. Every bump, every shift, sent pain radiating through Angela's body. But pain was just sensation. It wasn't a wall. She could move through it. Outside, the morning sun was blinding. Angela realized she hadn't seen daylight in months, possibly longer. She squinted against the brightness, tears streaming down her face, unsure if they were from the light or the overwhelming rush of emotion. She was outside. After years of self-imposed exile, she was in the world again. The van was specially equipped with a hydraulic lift. Within minutes, Angela was secured inside, Patricia sitting beside her, monitoring her vitals while James drove. Rebecca had arranged to meet them at the emergency shelter in Houston, a 3-hour drive that felt both endless and far too short. "You doing okay?" Patricia asked, squeezing Angela's hand. "I don't know," Angela admitted. "Ask me when we're out of Louisiana." Patricia smiled. Fair enough. The shelter was nothing like Angela had imagined. She'd pictured something institutional, cold, temporary. Instead, it was a renovated house in a quiet Houston neighborhood, painted cheerful yellow, with ramps and widened doorways. A woman named Carmen met them at the door. The director, Angela would later learn, herself a survivor. "Welcome," Carmen said simply. "You're safe here." Rebecca arrived an hour later. When she saw Angela, really saw her for the first time in years, she broke down completely. She sat beside the hospital bed they'd set up in the ground floor bedroom and held Angela's hand, crying too hard to speak. "I'm sorry," Rebecca finally managed. "I should have come sooner. I should have." "You're here now," Angela interrupted. "That's what matters." Over the next weeks, reality set in. Angela met with lawyers who helped her file for divorce and for a restraining order. The legal system moved slowly, grinding through paperwork while Angela healed in other ways. She met with doctors who designed a medical plan, therapists who helped her understand the trauma she'd survived, nutritionists who taught her about food as fuel rather than coping mechanism. The restraining order was granted first. Marcus was served at work, according to Rebecca, who'd heard from an old mutual friend. Apparently, he'd crumpled the papers in his fist, face turning red, before walking off the job. He'd tried calling Angela's old phone, which was now in police evidence, 17 times in one afternoon. The divorce papers came next. Angela signed them from her bed at the shelter, her hand shaking, but steady enough. Her lawyer said Marcus could contest, could drag things out, could make this difficult. He didn't. 3 months after Angela walked out, Marcus signed the papers without argument. No alimony requested. No property disputes. No communication except through lawyers. Angela's attorney said it was unusually smooth. Sometimes, the lawyer told her, abusers lose interest once they realize they've lost control. You're not useful to him anymore, so he's moving on. Angela tried to feel relieved. Mostly she felt hollow. She was free. She'd survived. But freedom and healing weren't the same thing. She still weighed over 600 pounds. She still struggled to walk. She still woke up at night, gasping, convinced Marcus was standing in the doorway. Dr. Ravi Patterson entered her life in month 4. He was a bariatric surgeon who volunteered at the shelter, offering consultations to women whose trauma had manifested in weight gain. He sat beside Angela's bed, reviewed her medical history, and said something no doctor had ever said to her. Your body isn't the problem. Your body is a symptom. Let's treat the cause and the symptom together. The surgery, he explained, wasn't a cure. It was a tool, one piece of a much larger puzzle. There would be therapy, nutritional counseling, physical rehabilitation, support groups. The work would be harder than anything she'd ever done. But here's the thing, Dr. Patterson said, his dark eyes kind behind wire-rimmed glasses. You've already done the hardest part. You left. Everything after this, that's just showing up. Angela started crying, the ugly, gasping kind of crying that hurt her chest. What if I fail? Then you try again, Dr. Patterson said simply. Failure isn't falling down, Ms. Brooks. It's refusing to get back up. The surgery happened 6 months after Angela left Marcus. Gastric bypass, followed by months of painful recovery and adjustment. Some days were victories. The first time she could stand without assistance. The first time she could shower alone. The first time she walked the length of the hallway. Other days were defeats. The pain, the nausea, the frustration of wanting progress faster than her body could provide. The moment she woke up forgetting where she was, expecting to see water-stained ceiling and feel the weight of captivity. But slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, Angela started becoming a person again. Rebecca moved to Houston to be closer. She helped Angela find the little house on Cypress Avenue when Angela was finally ready to live alone. She sat with Angela during the hard days, celebrated the victories, and never once said, I told you so, even though she'd been warning Angela about Marcus for years. I was angry at you for a long time, Rebecca admitted one afternoon, sitting in Angela's new kitchen, for not leaving sooner, for not calling, for choosing him over family. I'm sorry, Angela said. No. Rebecca shook her head firmly. I'm the one who's sorry. I didn't understand. I thought it was a choice you were making. I didn't realize choice had been taken from you. The therapist Angela saw twice a week, Dr. Michelle Chun, helped her understand the difference too. You didn't choose to be abused, Dr. Chun would say. You chose to survive. Those are different things. 2 years after leaving, Angela had lost 300 pounds. Her body was still heavy, still marked by what it had endured, but it was hers again. She could walk. She could work. She could exist in the world without shame or fear. 3 years after leaving, she weighed less than 250 pounds. She'd started leading support groups, sharing her story, helping other women see the doors they'd stopped believing in. For years after leaving, Angela received word that the divorce was finalized. There was no celebration, just a quiet acknowledgement that a chapter was closed. She thought about Marcus sometimes, wondered where he was, what he was doing, whether he ever thought about her. But mostly she didn't. He was a ghost from another life, haunting someone she used to be, but no longer was. Angela thought, leaving Marcus into the story. She thought wrong. For him, it was only the beginning. The scale read 187 pounds. Angela stared at the numbers, blinking hard to make sure she was reading them correctly. 187. She weighed more than that in 8th grade. She did the math quickly in her head. She'd started this journey at somewhere north of 620 pounds. That meant she'd lost over 430 pounds. Over 430 pounds. More than 2 entire people. Well, Dr. Patterson called from outside the examination room. Are you going to tell me, or make me guess? Angela opened the door, her face split by a grin so wide it hurt. 187. Dr. Patterson's weathered face crumpled into a smile. In the 5 years he'd been treating Angela, she'd watched him age. More gray in his temples, deeper lines around his eyes. But his enthusiasm never dimmed. Angela Brooks, you are a walking miracle. More like a walking work in progress, she corrected, but she was still smiling. The excess skin hung from her arms, her stomach, her thighs, a permanent reminder of the body she'd carried. She'd need surgery eventually to remove it, but that felt like a problem for future Angela. Present Angela was just marveling at the fact that she could walk into this office without assistance, could sit in a regular chair, could cross her legs. How are you feeling? Physically, emotionally? Dr. Patterson asked, settling into his chair across from her. Stronger, Angela said, considering. Still surprised every morning when I wake up and remember this is real. Sometimes I have dreams that I'm back in that apartment, back in that bed. And Marcus is, she stopped, swallowing hard. And Marcus is what? Standing in the doorway, watching me, waiting. Angela wrapped her arms around herself. Dr. Chun says it's normal. PTSD. The nightmares are less frequent than they used to be. But they're still there. They're still there, Angela confirmed. But so am I. And I'm getting better at telling my brain the difference between then and now. Dr. Patterson made a note in her chart. Speaking of now, I hear you're expanding your work at the Hope Center. More groups. Angela nodded, grateful for the subject change. 3 nights a week now instead of 2. And we're starting a daytime support group for people who can't make evening sessions. The demand is... She shook her head. It's overwhelming sometimes. There are so many people suffering in silence, carrying weight that isn't just physical. You're making a real difference, Angela. I'm trying to be the person I needed when I was drowning, Angela said softly. That's all. After the appointment, Angela stopped by Rebecca's house for their weekly dinner. Rebecca had moved into a small craftsman-style home in the Garden District, painted seafoam green with white trim. Angela's nieces, 8-year-old Sophie and 6-year-old Maya, burst out the front door before Angela even made it up the walkway. Aunt Angela! Sophie shrieked, launching herself at Angela with the confidence of a child who'd never known a time when her aunt couldn't catch her. Angela scooped her up, actually lifted her off the ground, and spun her around. The casual miracle of it never got old. Hey, Ladybug, how was school? Boring, Sophie declared. But Mom says you have news. Angela set Sophie down and knelt to Maya's level, pulling her into a hug. News? What kind of news? The secret kind, Maya whispered conspiratorially. The kind that makes Mom cry happy tears. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, her eyes already suspiciously bright. Girls, inside. Set the table for dinner. The girls raced off, and Rebecca pulled Angela into a fierce embrace. You told him yes. It wasn't a question. Angela had called her sister from the restaurant bathroom 2 months ago, crying so hard she could barely speak. Daniel had just proposed, and Angela had been overwhelmed by the sheer impossibility of being chosen, of being loved, of being seen as worthy. I told him yes, Angela confirmed, holding up her left hand where the modest diamond caught the late afternoon light. Rebecca grabbed her hand, examining the ring with the intensity of a jeweler. It's perfect. He's perfect. You're perfect. I'm so happy I could explode. Please don't explode, Angela laughed. The girls would be traumatized. Inside, over Rebecca's famous jambalaya, Angela told them about the proposal. Daniel had taken her to the park where they'd had their first date, a simple picnic by the lake. He'd been nervous, fumbling with the ring box, his carefully rehearsed speech dissolving into rambling honesty. I'm not good at this, he'd said, his hand shaking. I had a whole thing planned, but I keep forgetting the words because all I can think about is how much I love you. How every day with you feels like a gift I don't deserve, but I'm taking anyway. You're the strongest, kindest, most beautiful person I've ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I see you. Really see you. So, Angela Brooks, will you marry me? What did you say? Sophie asked, leaning forward with her chin in her hands. I said yes before he even finished asking, Angela admitted. I was crying too hard to be dignified about it. That's so romantic, Sophie sighed. That's so gross, Maya countered, wrinkling her nose. But she was smiling. After dinner, while the girls played in the backyard, Rebecca and Angela sat on the porch swing, nursing glasses of sweet tea. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost artificial in their beauty. Have you thought about when? Rebecca asked. For the wedding? Spring, Angela said. Maybe April. Something small. Just family and close friends. No big production. Angela shook her head. I spent so many years invisible. I don't need to be the center of attention now. I just need to marry Daniel surrounded by people who supported me. That's enough. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Then, have you thought about him? Angela didn't need to ask who him was. No. Why would I? Because you're getting married, Rebecca said carefully. Because legally, he's still your ex-husband. Because sometimes people from our past have opinions about our future. Marcus signed the divorce papers 4 years ago and hasn't contacted me since, Angela said firmly. He doesn't get to have opinions about my life anymore. I know. You're right. Rebecca squeezed her hand. I just worry. I know you do, Angela said softly. But I'm safe now. That part of my life is over. A month later, Angela decided to share her story publicly. Dr. Chen had been encouraging her for months to consider it. Your journey could help people, she'd said. And sometimes sharing our stories helps us reclaim our narrative. We stop being the victim in our own minds and become the survivor, the fighter, the hero. Angela wasn't sure about hero, but she understood the impulse. So on a quiet Sunday afternoon, she sat at her kitchen table with her laptop and began typing. She wrote about the weight, about the abuse, about the escape and the transformation. She didn't name Marcus. Dr. Chen had advised against it, both for legal reasons and for Angela's own peace. But she told the truth about what she'd survived. When she finished, Angela had a 1,200-word post that felt both terrifying and liberating to read. She attached 2 photos, one from her worst period, a picture Rebecca had taken at a family gathering, where Angela had been so large she'd barely fit in the frame, and one from last week, where she stood on her porch in jeans and a blue blouse, smiling genuinely at the camera. The transformation was shocking even to her. Angela posted it to her private Facebook account first, where it was visible only to friends and family. Then, after some encouragement from her support group, she shared it to several bariatric surgery and domestic violence survivor groups she was part of. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, she had 50 comments. By evening, over 200. By the next morning, her post had been shared across multiple platforms. Women she'd never met were writing paragraphs about how her story resonated, how it gave them hope, how they'd recognized their own lives in her words. You're going viral, Rebecca texted her, along with a screenshot showing the post had been shared in a group with over 50,000 members. Angela felt simultaneously exposed and empowered. This was her story, and she was controlling the narrative for the first time in her life. She wasn't a cautionary tale or a victim. She was a survivor, publicly reclaiming space she'd been denied for so long. Among the hundreds of comments were messages from other survivors, from people struggling with weight, from individuals who saw themselves in her story. Angela tried to respond to as many as she could, offering encouragement, sharing resources, listening to their stories in return. She didn't notice the friend request from an account named Robert Martinez, with no profile picture. She didn't see the screenshot of her post, saved to a phone in Houston. She didn't know that 200 miles away, Marcus Brooks was staring at her engagement photo with shaking hands and a rage so profound it made his vision blur. Angela shared her happiness with the world, never realizing one person was watching very closely. Marcus Brooks sat in his studio apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled perpetually of mildew and old cigarettes, staring at his phone screen until his eyes burned. The photo taunted him. Angela is Angela, standing on some porch, wearing clothes that actually fit, smiling like she'd forgotten what suffering felt like. And beside her in other photos, some man. Daniel something. A teacher, according to the post. Respectable. Boring. Safe. Everything Marcus wasn't. The post had appeared in Marcus's feed because a cousin he barely spoke to had shared it from one of those survivor groups. So inspiring. The cousin had written, adding a heart emoji. Marcus had almost scrolled past. He'd stopped caring about Angela's life years ago, or so he'd told himself. But then he'd seen the photo, and everything inside him had fractured. She'd lost the weight. All of it. More than all of it. She looked. He struggled to find a word that didn't feel like betrayal. She looked healthy, happy, beautiful, in a way he'd convinced himself she could never be again. And she was engaged, getting married, moving on, as if he'd never existed, as if 10 years of marriage could be erased with some surgery and a new address. Marcus threw his phone across the room. It bounced off the wall and landed screen down on the stained carpet. He immediately regretted it. Phones cost money, and money was something he hadn't had much of since the divorce. Since Angela left, he'd been so certain she never would. Angela had been his project, his responsibility, his burden, his possession. She'd needed him, depended on him. The idea that she could function without him had been laughable. He'd watched her become so large that leaving was physically impossible, and he'd felt, not quite satisfied, but secure, safe in the knowledge that regardless of how bad things got, Angela couldn't escape. The life insurance policy had been practical, not malicious. That's what Marcus told himself. He'd paid those premiums faithfully for 5 years, watching Angela eat herself toward an early grave, and he'd thought eventually he'd be compensated for his loyalty, for staying when anyone else would have left, for enduring the embarrassment of being married to a woman who'd let herself go so completely. But Angela had left. She'd somehow found the will and the way, and she'd disappeared while he was at work like a ghost dissolving in sunlight. The police had shown up at his job with a restraining order, humiliating him in front of his crew. His friends had looked at him differently after that, whispered when they thought he couldn't hear. Abusive, they said. Controlling. He'd lost the construction job 3 months after the divorce finalized. Budget cuts, his boss claimed, but Marcus knew better. Once you were labeled, the label stuck. Now he worked part-time at a warehouse, loading trucks for barely above minimum wage. His apartment was a fraction of the size of the place he'd shared with Angela. Just one room with a kitchenette and a bathroom where the shower leaked. He ate ramen noodles and canned soup, unable to afford much else after rent and child support for the kids he never saw from his first marriage. Child support. That was another wound. His ex-wife, the one before Angela, had taken him to court years ago, and every month a chunk of his paycheck disappeared to support children who'd been turned against him. He hadn't seen them in 7 years. They probably didn't even remember his face. Everything had been taken from him. And now Angela was flaunting her happiness online like a middle finger to his suffering. Marcus retrieved his phone from the floor. The screen had cracked, a spiderweb fracture across the top left corner, but still worked. He opened the photo again, zooming in on Angela's face. She was smiling at the camera, but her eyes were looking slightly to the left. At him. At Daniel. The man who'd replaced Marcus. Rage was too simple a word for what Marcus felt. It was more complex than that. A mixture of betrayal, humiliation, possessiveness, and something that felt almost like grief. He'd invested 10 years in Angela. He'd stayed when she'd become morbidly obese, when she'd stopped being a wife in any meaningful sense. He'd sacrificed his own happiness for her, and this was his reward. To be discarded, replaced, forgotten. Marcus began scrolling through Angela's profile. Most of it was private, but he could see her friends list, some public posts, photos she'd been tagged in. He created a fake account. Robert Martinez, generic name, stock photo of a smiling man, and sent her a friend request. She didn't accept, but he could still see posts in mutual groups. He watched her life unfold in snippets. The support groups she led, the advocacy work she did, articles shared about domestic violence and recovery, photos with her sister, her nieces, her friends, and always photos with Daniel, holding hands at dinner, hiking some trail, laughing at a movie, living a life Marcus had been denied. The obsession grew gradually, the way mold spreads across a wall. Invisible at first, then suddenly consuming. Marcus started driving to Baton Rouge on his days off, telling himself he just wanted to see where Angela lived. Just wanted to understand how she'd built this new life. He found a house on Cypress Avenue easily enough. Angela had been careless in one post, tagging her location. Marcus parked down the street, watching. He saw Angela leave for work, return with groceries, sit on her porch reading. She looked content, peaceful. It made Marcus want to scream. He started keeping a journal, a composition notebook where he wrote down everything. Times Angela left the house, what she wore, when Daniel visited, when Rebecca stopped by. He wasn't stalking, he told himself. He was just observing, trying to understand what had gone so wrong in his own life, while Angela's had gone so right. The journal entries grew darker. March 15th. She's gained everything I lost. How is that fair? March 22nd. 10 years of my life. 10 years. And she acts like I never existed. April 3rd. The wedding is in 3 weeks. I saw her picking up flowers. White roses. She always said she hated white roses. But I guess she's changed everything about herself now. April 10th. I paid those insurance premiums for 5 years. That's $15,000 I'll never get back. She owes me. That last entry stopped Marcus cold when he read it back. She owed him. Yes, that was exactly right. Angela owed him for the years he'd stayed, the sacrifices he'd made, the humiliation he'd endured. And she was trying to skip out on the debt by getting married and living happily ever after. Well, Marcus decided there were no happy endings. Not for him. So why should Angela get one? He began planning in earnest. Not to hurt her. He wasn't violent, he told himself. He wasn't some monster. He just wanted to talk to her. Make her understand what she'd done. Make her see that actions had consequences. That you couldn't just rebuild your life on the ashes of someone else's and expect no repercussions. The gun was easy to acquire. Louisiana had loose laws, and Marcus had no criminal record. He told the gun shop owner it was for home protection. The owner congratulated him on being a responsible gun owner. Marcus kept the gun in his nightstand, unloaded, just having it made him feel more in control, more powerful, like he had options. He practiced what he'd say to Angela, sometimes in the car, sometimes in front of his bathroom mirror. The words changed each time, but the core message remained. You can't just erase me. I matter. I existed. You owe me acknowledgement, if not compensation. His co-workers noticed the change in him. You doing okay, Brooks? His supervisor asked after Marcus snapped at a younger employee for moving boxes wrong. Fine, Marcus lied. Just tired. But he wasn't tired. He was energized in a manic, desperate way. For the first time since Angela left, Marcus had purpose. He had a plan. He had control over something. The wedding was set for April 20th. Marcus marked it on his calendar, circling the date over and over until the pen tore through the paper. He'd give Angela one last chance to make things right, to acknowledge what she'd done to him, to take some responsibility for how her abandonment had destroyed his life. And if she refused, Marcus touched the gun in his nightstand, feeling its cold weight. If she refused, she'd learn that some debts couldn't be walked away from. Marcus didn't see Angela's happiness as freedom. He saw it as betrayal. The day was perfect in that specific Louisiana way, humid and bright, with clouds building on the horizon that promised afternoon rain. Angela had taken the day off from the Hope Center to finalize wedding details. In 3 days, she'd be married. The thought still felt surreal, like a dream she kept expecting to wake from. She'd spent the morning at the florist, confirming the delivery time for the white roses and eucalyptus arrangements. Then lunch with Rebecca and the girls, who chattered excitedly about their flower girl dresses. Now, at 2 in the afternoon, Angela was home, sitting on her porch with a glass of iced tea and a notebook, writing her vows. Daniel, she'd written, you taught me that love doesn't have to hurt, that I don't have to shrink myself to deserve affection. That, she paused, pen hovering over paper. How did you quantify what Daniel had given her? Safety felt too simple. Hope felt too abstract. He'd given her a future she'd stopped believing in. But that felt too heavy for vows meant to be spoken in front of their small gathering of loved ones. Angela set the notebook aside and took a sip of tea, watching a neighbor's cat stalk a lizard across the lawn. The wind chimes sang softly. A car drove past, then another. The world moved at its lazy afternoon pace. Then she saw the truck. It was old, maybe 15 years, dark blue with a dent in the front fender. It slowed as it approached her house, then pulled to a stop across the street. Angela's first thought was that it must be someone lost, looking for an address. Her second thought, arriving half a second later with a jolt of ice in her stomach, was, I know that truck. The driver's door opened. Marcus Brooks stepped out into the afternoon sun, and Angela's entire body went rigid. He looked different, thinner, more haggard, wearing jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt that hung loose on his frame. But his eyes were the same. That particular intensity that Angela had once mistaken for passion but had learned to recognize as possession. For a moment, they just stared at each other across the expanse of street and lawn. Angela's mind screamed contradictory commands. Run. Stay still. Call someone. Don't move. Her hand tightened around her phone, which sat on the table beside her notebook. Marcus walked across the street slowly, his hands visible at his sides. Non-threatening, or trying to appear that way. Angela stood, positioning herself near the front door. Escape route, if needed. Angela, Marcus said, stopping at the edge of her lawn. His voice was rough, like he'd forgotten how to use it. I need to talk to you. You have a restraining order, Angela said, proud that her voice came out steady. You're not supposed to be here. I know. Marcus took another step forward. But I had to see you. I had to. He stopped, his jaw working. You look good. The compliment felt like an insult. Angela said nothing. I saw your post. Marcus continued. About everything. About me, even though you didn't use my name. About the weight loss. About him. He spat the last word like poison. You're really going to marry him? That's none of your business, Angela said. None of my. Marcus's face contorted with anger. I was your husband for 10 years, Angela. 10 years of my life, I gave you. And you throw it away like it meant nothing. You didn't give me anything, Angela said, and she was surprised by the strength in her own voice. You took. You controlled. You isolated me. You made me believe I was worthless. I stayed, Marcus shouted, and Angela flinched despite herself. When you got fat, when you got so big you couldn't even walk, I stayed. I could have left. Anyone else would have left. But I stayed, and this is how you repay me. Angela felt something crystallize inside her. It was rage, yes, but also clarity. She'd spent years in therapy, learning to recognize manipulation. This was it. The core lie Marcus had always told, that Angela had always believed, that his staying was a gift, that she should be grateful for his presence rather than horrified by what he'd done to her. You stayed because you wanted me helpless, Angela said quietly. You stayed because you took out a life insurance policy and you were waiting for me to die. Marcus's face went white. How did you? I found it. 5 years ago, right before I left. Angela's hands were shaking now, but she kept her voice level. You weren't noble, Marcus. You were patient. You were waiting for me to eat myself to death so you could collect. That's not. Marcus sputtered. I never. $500,000, Angela said. That's what I was worth to you dead. But alive and happy. I guess that ruins your investment. Something in Marcus's expression shifted. The false confusion dropped away, replaced by cold anger. You had no right to go through my papers. You had no right to take out a policy on my life, Angela shot back. They stared at each other, and Angela realized this was what she'd been preparing for in therapy without knowing it. The confrontation, the moment where she stopped being afraid and started being angry, where she reclaimed her narrative from the man who tried to write her ending. I want you to leave, Angela said firmly. Right now, or I'm calling the police. You ruined my life, Marcus said, and his voice broke. Everything I had, my job, my apartment, my reputation, gone because you left. Because you couldn't just be satisfied with what we had. What we had was abuse, Marcus, Angela said. And I'm not responsible for the consequences of your actions. You destroyed your own life, Marcus, not me. You're happy, Marcus said, and there was something desperate in his voice now. You're actually happy. How is that fair? I'm living in a shithole apartment, working for minimum wage, and you're here planning some fairy tale wedding like the last 10 years never happened. They happened, Angela said softly. I have the scars to prove it, but I survived them, and now I'm moving forward. You should too, by marrying him, by parading your happiness online, by making me look like the villain. You made yourself the villain, Angela said. I just finally stopped protecting you from the consequences. Marcus's hand moved to his waistband, and Angela's entire world slowed down. She saw his fingers grip something, saw the gun emerge from beneath his shirt, saw the dull metal gleam in the afternoon sun. Her body reacted before her mind could process. She turned, reaching for the door, thinking only, inside. Get inside. Lock the door. Don't, Marcus said, and his voice was different now. Flat. Cold. Don't run from me again. Angela froze, her hand on the doorknob. Slowly, she turned back to face him. Marcus stood at the bottom of her porch steps, gun pointed not quite at her, not quite away. His hands were shaking. His eyes were wild. He looked like a man who'd stepped off a cliff and was still waiting to hit the ground. I don't want to hurt you, Marcus said, and he sounded like he meant it. I just want you to understand, to take responsibility, to admit that you owe me something for everything I gave up for you. Put the gun down, Marcus, Angela said, her voice remarkably calm. Whatever you think you're owed, this isn't how you get it. You humiliated me, Marcus said, and tears were streaming down his face now. You made me into a joke, a cautionary tale, the abusive ex-husband in your inspiring story. Do you know what that's like? To have strangers look at you like you're a monster. Do you know what it's like to be trapped in your own body? Angela countered. To be so afraid of your husband that you'd rather die than face another day with him? I never hit you, Marcus shouted. There are worse things than hitting, Angela said softly. They stood frozen in that terrible tableau. Marcus with his gun, Angela with her hand on the doorknob, the afternoon sun beating down on them both. Mrs. Chin's wind chimes continued their cheerful song. A dog barked somewhere down the street. The world kept turning, indifferent to the crisis unfolding on Cypress Avenue. I loved you, Marcus said, and his voice cracked completely. In my own way, I loved you. Why wasn't that enough? Because love isn't supposed to hurt, Angela said. Love isn't control. It isn't possession. It isn't making someone believe they're worthless without you. That's not love, Marcus. That's ownership. And he loves you better? Marcus demanded, gesturing with the gun toward the house, toward Angela's life, toward everything she'd built. This teacher, this nobody, he loves you better than I did. Yes, Angela said simply. He loves me like I'm a person, not a possession. Something in Marcus broke. Angela saw it happen, saw the exact moment when the desperation in his eyes hardened into something darker. He raised the gun, and time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. Angela thought, with strange clarity, this is how it ends. After everything I survived, this is how my story ends. But another part of her, the part that had called the police years ago, that had reached out to the domestic violence hotline at 2 a.m, that had walked away when walking seemed impossible, that part refused to accept it. Marcus, Angela said, and her voice was strong despite the terror coursing through her. If you do this, you prove everything I said about you is true. You prove that you're exactly the monster you claim you're not. Is that really how you want this to end? Marcus's hand wavered. I forgave you, Angela continued, and she realized as she said it that it was true. Years ago, I forgave you. Not because you deserved it, but because I deserved peace. I let go of my anger. I rebuilt my life. I moved forward. You could do the same, Marcus. You can put the gun down and walk away and start over. But if you pull that trigger, you're choosing to be defined by this moment forever. For a long, terrible moment, Marcus just stood there, gun raised, face contorted with anguish and rage and something that might have been grief. Then, from down the street, a voice called out, Angela, everything okay? Mr. Rodriguez, standing in his yard, garden hose in hand, staring at the scene unfolding before him. The spell broke. Marcus looked at Mr. Rodriguez, then back at Angela, then at the gun in his hand. Angela saw him make a decision, saw his finger move toward the trigger, and then the sound that followed would forever divide Angela's life into before and after. The gunshot was louder than Angela expected, a sharp crack that seemed to split the afternoon in half. She felt the impact before she understood what had happened. A burning sensation in her left shoulder, a force that spun her sideways and sent her crashing against the porch railing. Time moved strangely. Angela was on the ground, though she didn't remember falling. Her shoulder was screaming, white-hot pain that radiated down her arm and across her chest. She heard voices, distant and distorted, as if coming from underwater. Mr. Rodriguez was shouting. Mrs. Chun was running across her lawn, phone pressed to her ear. And Marcus was standing frozen, the gun hanging loose in his hand, staring at Angela with an expression of absolute horror. "I didn't," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "I wasn't going to." But he had. Whatever his intentions had been a moment before, the reality was undeniable. Angela was bleeding on her porch, her notebook of wedding vows soaking crimson beside her, and Marcus had pulled the trigger. Mr. Rodriguez tackled Marcus before he could decide what to do next. The older man moved with surprising speed, knocking the gun from Marcus's hand and pinning him to the lawn. Marcus didn't resist. He just kept repeating, I didn't mean to, like a broken prayer. Angela tried to sit up, but the pain was overwhelming. Her vision swam. She heard sirens, distant but growing closer. Mrs. Chun was beside her suddenly, pressing something soft against Angela's shoulder, speaking in soothing tones that Angela couldn't quite process. "Stay still, sweetie. Help is coming. You're going to be okay. Just stay with me." Angela wanted to tell Mrs. Chun that she was fine, that she'd survived worse, that a bullet couldn't undo everything she'd rebuilt. But the words wouldn't come. The world was tilting, darkening at the edges, and Angela thought with strange detachment, "Not like this. I didn't survive everything just to die on my porch." Then Rebecca's voice cut through the fog. "Angela. Oh God, Angela." Her sister materialized beside her, face white with terror, hands hovering over Angela's body as if afraid to touch her. "Stay awake," Rebecca commanded, tears streaming down her face. "Stay with me. Daniel's on his way. The ambulance is almost here. Just stay awake." Angela wanted to tell her sister that she loved her, that she was sorry for all the years she'd been absent, that Rebecca had saved her life by never giving up. But forming words required energy Angela didn't have. So she just looked at Rebecca and hoped her eyes communicated everything her voice couldn't. The paramedics arrived in a blur of efficiency. Angela was lifted onto a stretcher, an oxygen mask placed over her face, and 4 inserted into her arm. She caught glimpses of the scene as they wheeled her to the ambulance. Marcus being handcuffed by police officers, his face crumpled with anguish. Mr. Rodriguez giving a statement, still shaking with adrenaline. Mrs. Chun holding Rebecca as her sister sobbed. And then the ambulance doors closed, and Angela surrendered to the darkness. She woke in a hospital to the sound of machines beeping and Daniel's voice reading to her. "The woods are lovely, dark and deep," Daniel was saying softly, his hand wrapped around hers. "But I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep." "Robert Frost," Angela whispered, her voice hoarse. "Stopping by woods on a snowy evening." Daniel's head jerked up, his eyes red-rimmed, but blazing with relief. "Angela. Oh, thank God. Thank God." He pressed his forehead against their joined hands, his shoulders shaking. "How bad?" Angela asked. Daniel lifted his head, brushing tears from his face. "The bullet went through your shoulder, missed the bone, missed major arteries. They said you were incredibly lucky. Another few inches." He couldn't finish the sentence. "But I'm okay," Angela said. It wasn't a question. She could feel her body, battered, hurting, but alive, still fighting. "You're okay," Daniel confirmed, kissing her knuckles. "Rebecca's in the waiting room with your nieces. The doctor said you can have more visitors once you're fully awake. Do you remember what happened?" Angela closed her eyes, and a memory rushed back with painful clarity. Marcus, the gun, the confrontation, the moment she'd thought was her ending. "He shot me," she said quietly. "Marcus shot me. He's in custody," Daniel said, his voice hardening. "They arrested him at the scene. He's being charged with attempted murder, violating a restraining order, and a dozen other things. He's not getting out, Angela. Not for a very long time." Angela should have felt relief, victory. Instead, she just felt tired. Did he say why? Daniel was quiet for a moment. "The police report said he kept repeating that he just wanted to talk to you, that the gun was just to make you listen, that it was an accident." He paused, but witnesses heard the conversation. "Angela." Mrs. Chin recorded part of it on her phone. "He wasn't there to talk. He was there to punish you for moving on." Angela absorbed this. Part of her had known, even in the moment. Marcus hadn't come for closure. He'd come to reclaim control, to prove that even after 4 years and 600 pounds and a completely rebuilt life, he could still destroy her if he chose. He failed, Angela said softly. I'm still here. You're still here, Daniel echoed, bringing her hand to his lips again. And in 3 days, if you still want, we're getting married. Hospital chapel, if necessary. I'm not waiting another moment to make you my wife. Despite everything, the pain, the trauma, the violation of her safety, Angela smiled. The hospital chapel. I'll marry you anywhere, Daniel said fiercely. On this hospital bed, if that's what it takes. I almost lost you today, Angela. I'm not taking any chances with our future. Rebecca burst into the room before Angela could respond, followed by Sophie and Maya, who'd clearly been coached to be gentle, but couldn't quite contain their relief. They surrounded the bed, and Angela was enveloped in the messy, tearful embrace of people who loved her unconditionally. This was what Marcus had tried to destroy. This web of connection, this foundation of love. He'd wanted her isolated, afraid, alone. He'd spent 10 years building those walls around her, and then 4 more years resenting that she'd torn them down. But the walls were gone, and Angela was surrounded by people who'd helped her demolish them. The trial took 8 months to reach court. Angela spent that time healing, physically from the gunshot wound, emotionally from the violation of being hunted down by the man she'd escaped. The wedding happened in June, 2 months after the shooting. They held it in Angela's backyard, with Angela's arms still in a sling, but her smile radiant. Rebecca served as maid of honor. Sophie and Maya scattered rose petals. Daniel cried through his vows, and Angela cried through hers, and no one who witnessed it doubted for a moment that this was what love actually looked like. When the trial finally began, Angela was ready. She prepared for this, worked with therapists, with victim advocates, with prosecutors who assured her that her testimony would be crucial. Marcus had pleaded not guilty, claiming the shooting was accidental, that he'd only wanted to talk, that Angela had misunderstood his intentions. The jury would decide whose story to believe. Angela took the stand on a Wednesday morning, wearing a simple navy dress and the wedding ring that Daniel had placed on her finger 2 months earlier. She looked directly at Marcus as she was sworn in, saw him sitting at the defense table looking small and defeated in a suit that didn't fit properly. He wouldn't meet her eyes. The prosecutor led Angela through her testimony methodically. The history of abuse, the life insurance policy, the escape and recovery, the years of no contact, the viral post, the confrontation, the gun, the shot. Ms. Carter, the prosecutor said, Angela had taken Daniel's last name. The defendant claims this was an accident, that he came to your home to have a conversation and the gun discharged unintentionally. What do you say to that? Angela looked at Marcus, who was finally looking back at her. She saw in his face what she'd seen that afternoon on her porch, a man who genuinely believed he was the victim, who'd constructed a narrative where Angela's survival was his persecution, where her happiness was his punishment. I say, Angela began, her voice steady, that Marcus came to my home with a loaded gun because he believed I owed him something. My suffering, my defeat, my acknowledgement that he'd broken me. And when he realized I wouldn't give him that I'd survived and healed and moved on, he decided to take it by force. She paused. Accidents require the absence of intent. Marcus intended to hurt me long before he pulled that trigger. The only accident was that I survived. The defense attorney tried to shake her testimony on cross-examination, suggesting that Angela had exaggerated the abuse, that she was biased against Marcus, that her memory of events was colored by trauma. But Angela had spent 5 years in therapy, learning to trust her own perceptions. She didn't waver. When the prosecution rested, they called Mrs. Chun to the stand. She testified about what she'd witnessed, then played the recording she'd made on her phone. The jury heard Marcus's words. You humiliated me. You made me into a joke. I just want you to understand. They heard Angela's calm responses, her attempts to de-escalate, her refusal to accept blame for Marcus's choices. They heard the gunshot. The defense called Marcus to testify in his own defense, a risky move, but necessary given how damning the evidence was. Marcus took the stand looking genuinely remorseful. He testified that he'd been in a dark place, that he'd made mistakes, that he'd never intended for things to escalate the way they had. I loved Angela, Marcus said, his voice breaking. I still love her. I just wanted her to see that I wasn't the monster she made me out to be in her post. I wanted closure. I brought the gun for protection. I didn't know what kind of neighborhood she lived in. And when that man shouted at me, I got startled and my fingers slipped. It was an accident. I would never intentionally hurt Angela. The prosecutor dismantled this story methodically on cross-examination. If you loved her, why did you violate a restraining order to confront her? I wasn't thinking clearly. If you brought the gun for protection, why did you point it at Miss Carter? I didn't mean to. If it was an accident, why were you crying and saying you wanted her to understand? Marcus had no good answers. The more he spoke, the clearer it became. This was a man who'd convinced himself of his own victimhood so thoroughly that he couldn't recognize his guilt. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous: guilty on all counts. Attempted murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, violation of a protective order, stalking. At sentencing, the judge looked at Marcus with something that might have been pity. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "you had opportunities to move on, to heal, to build a different life. Instead, you chose to nurse your grievances until they consumed you. You chose to blame Ms. Carter for the consequences of your own actions. And ultimately, you chose to try to take her life because you couldn't accept that she'd reclaimed her own." The judge sentenced Marcus to 25 years in prison. Marcus showed no reaction. He just stared at his hands, shoulders slumped, looking like a man who'd already imprisoned himself long before the verdict came down. Angela watched from a gallery, Daniel's hand warm in hers. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a profound sadness for all the wasted years, hers and Marcus's both. Two lives that could have been different if Marcus had chosen growth over grievance, acceptance over control. But he hadn't, and so here they were. 2 years after the trial, Angela stood in front of a packed auditorium at a domestic violence awareness conference in Chicago. She'd been invited to speak about her experience, not just the abuse, but the recovery, the transformation, the survival. "I used to think," Angela said, looking out at the sea of faces, "that my story was about weight loss. That the most impressive thing I'd done was lose over 600 pounds. And don't get me wrong, that was hard. Incredibly, painfully hard." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But the hardest thing I ever did wasn't losing weight. It was learning to recognize that I deserved to exist in the world, that I didn't need to shrink myself, physically or emotionally, to be worthy of love and respect. That my happiness wasn't selfishness. That leaving wasn't betrayal. That surviving wasn't victory over Marcus. It was victory for myself." Angela's hand moved unconsciously to her shoulder, where a scar marked the place the bullet had entered. She'd kept the scar visible in the sleeveless dress she wore. Proof of what she'd survived. Evidence that violence had touched her, but not claimed her. "The man who shot me believed he owned me," Angela continued. "He believed that because he'd stayed during my worst years, I owed him my future. He couldn't accept that people aren't debts to be collected. That love isn't ownership. That my transformation wasn't about him at all. It was about me reclaiming myself." She saw people nodding, dabbing at their eyes. She saw survivors who recognized their own stories in hers. This was why she did this work. Not for recognition or applause, but because she knew what it felt like to believe escape was impossible. "If you take nothing else from my story," Angela said, "take this. You are not responsible for your abuser's feelings. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. And you are not defined by the worst thing that's ever happened to you. You are defined by how you respond to it." The applause when she finished was thunderous. People stood. Some were crying openly. After the speech, dozens of people approached her, some to share their own stories, some to ask for advice, some just to say thank you. Among them was a young woman who looked to be in her early 20s, tears streaming down her face. "I'm over 400 pounds, she whispered. "And my boyfriend, he says if I lose weight, I'll leave him. So he brings me food, constantly. And I eat it because I don't know how to stop. Your story, hearing what you survived, it made me realize it's not normal. That's not love." Angela took the woman's hands in hers. "What's your name?" "Jessica." "Jessica, you deserve better than someone who wants to keep you trapped. Better than someone who feeds your pain instead of your soul. And I promise you, I promise, that leaving is possible. It's hard, but it's possible. And there are people who will help you." She gave Jessica the contact information for several domestic violence organizations and support groups. Watched as the young woman walked away with something Angela recognized in her posture, a fragile, newborn hope. This was Angela's life now, not defined by what had been done to her, but by what she did with what remained. She led support groups. She spoke at conferences. She wrote a book about her journey that became a New York Times bestseller. She advocated for policy changes that would better protect domestic violence survivors. And she lived, fully, joyfully, unapologetically. She and Daniel bought a house with a garden where they grew tomatoes and herbs. They traveled, something Angela had never thought possible, visiting Maine, which she'd dreamed about as a girl. They fostered 2 dogs from the local shelter, both rescues who'd been abandoned and needed patient love to heal. Rebecca's girls called Angela every Sunday to tell her about their week. Sophie was 12 now, already showing signs of Rebecca's fierce independence. Maya was 10, artistic and sensitive. Angela made sure they knew they were loved exactly as they were, that they would never need to shrink themselves for anyone. The nightmares still came sometimes. Angela would wake in the dark, heart racing, convinced Marcus was standing in her bedroom doorway. But Daniel would be there, solid and safe, pulling her close and reminding her, "You're here. You're safe. He's gone." And slowly, Angela would remember, the nightmare wasn't reality. Reality was this life she'd built, this joy she'd earned, this future she'd fought for. On the 5th anniversary of the shooting, Angela returned to Cypress Avenue. She'd long since moved. The house held too many painful memories, but she wanted to see it again, to face the place where she'd almost died and prove to herself that it no longer had power over her. Mrs. Chun still lived next door. Her wind chimes still sang the same metallic song. She saw Angela standing on the sidewalk and came out to greet her. "Angela Carter," Mrs. Chun said warmly, embracing her. "It's good to see you, dear. How are you?" "I'm good," Angela said, and meant it. "Really good. I just wanted to see the place again. Remind myself that I survived." Mrs. Chun nodded knowingly. "You did more than survive, sweetie. You thrived. That's what must eat him up inside, wherever he is. You didn't just escape him. You built something beautiful." Angela looked at the small beige house where she'd once lived. New people rented it now, a young couple with a baby, according to Mrs. Chun. They'd painted the trim blue, added flower boxes to the windows, made it theirs. The house was just a house. It held no ghosts. Marcus's presence had been scrubbed away by time and new life, and the simple fact that places don't remember violence the way people do. Angela had worried for years that Marcus had taken something from her that afternoon. Her sense of safety, her peace, her hard-won freedom. But standing there on Cypress Avenue, she realized he'd taken nothing that mattered. He'd tried to write her ending, but the story had continued without him. She was still here, still strong, still fighting, still free. Angela climbed back in her car, a reliable sedan she'd bought with money from her book advance, and drove home to Daniel, to her dogs, to her garden, to her life. Behind her, the wind chimes sang their metallic song. The sun shone warm on Cypress Avenue, and the world kept turning, indifferent and beautiful. Today, Marcus Brooks sits in his cell at Louisiana State Penitentiary, serving year 7 of his 25-year sentence. He's eligible for parole in 18 more years, when he'll be 63 years old, assuming he earns good behavior credits. He tells other inmates that he was set up, that his ex-wife lied, that he was the real victim. Most ignore him. They've heard versions of this story before. The man who couldn't let go, who confused love with ownership, who destroyed his life trying to destroy someone else's. Marcus doesn't think about Angela often anymore. When he does, it's with a mixture of resentment and confusion. He genuinely doesn't understand what he did wrong. In his version of events, he was loyal, patient, devoted. He stayed when others would have left. He deserved gratitude, not abandonment. It never occurs to Marcus that staying isn't always noble. That patience can be predatory. That devotion without respect is just another form of control. He will likely die in prison, having never understood the difference between love and captivity. Having never recognized that the worst prison he created wasn't Angela's body or their apartment. It was the cage of his own refusal to let go. Angela Carter, née Brooks, lives in a renovated farmhouse outside of Austin, Texas, with her husband Daniel, their 2 rescue dogs, in a garden that grows wild and beautiful in the heat. She still leads support groups, though now virtually, reaching survivors across the country. Her second book, a collection of essays about recovery and resilience, was published last year to critical acclaim. She's working on a third. On quiet evenings, Angela sits on her porch, different from the one where she was shot, but similar in the peace it offers, and writes in her journal. Sometimes she writes about the past, processing memories that still surface unexpectedly. More often, she writes about the present, the small joys, the daily victories, the extraordinary ordinariness of a life lived freely. She thinks about Marcus sometimes, not with anger anymore, but with the distant sadness you might feel for a stranger who took a wrong turn and never found their way back. She hopes, in an abstract way, that he finds peace. But she doesn't need him to for her own healing. His peace, or lack thereof, is no longer her responsibility. Angela lost over 600 pounds over the course of her transformation. She lost weight, yes, the physical burden that had imprisoned her. But she lost something more profound. She shed the belief that she deserved mistreatment, the conviction that she was worthless without someone else's validation, the idea that survival required making herself smaller. The most dangerous thing Angela ever shed wasn't the weight. It was the man who believed he owned her. And in shedding him, she found herself. Thank you for listening to Angela's story. Share this story with someone you know, someone who needs to hear it too. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss the next story.